Hi there, my name is Emily and I'm on the events team at the Ann Arbor District Library. Today I'm going to show you how to make some very simple beeswax candles. And if you like what you see here, please check out the other videos that we've got on AADL TV and hit that subscribe button. When a lot of people think about beeswax candles, they might think about the rolled candles that have a texture that's like a honeycomb, or they might think about the hand dipped candles, which are lovely types of candles. But what we're actually going to be making today is just the most simple, basic beeswax votive candle imaginable. So I'm going to be showing you some of the tools and materials that I'm using, and you could use this tutorial to make soy or paraffin wax candles as well. But the reason why I'm talking about beeswax is that beeswax has some special considerations because it has a higher melting point than soy or paraffin. So if you're used to making soy or paraffin candles and you try to use the same materials and processes as you would for beeswax, you might be a little disappointed. Beeswax just needs a little something different. And there's Fanny. Okay, so let me talk first about the actual materials that will go into the candles. So right here I've got a couple of pucks of beeswax. Um, they've got a little bit of a kind of patina on them. They're still perfectly good. They're just a couple of years old. Together, these are maybe about 5 ounces, 4.5 ounces, something like that. You can purchase it in 1 pound or 5 pound bricks, in which case you're going to need to cut it up or grate it, which is a huge amount of effort. And you can also buy it in pellets. And pellets definitely melt the most quickly. But the more processed something is, the more expensive it's going to be. So, buying it in a 5 pound brick is going to be a lot more work on your part, but it is going to be, the most cost effective way if you decide that you really, really want to make a lot of beeswax candles. I only make, a couple of batches of candles a year, so I'm perfectly fine with using these. So, I also have some leftover wax candle pieces, and I wanted to show these to you because this is one of my favorite things about making beeswax candles, is that beeswax remelts really well. And I find that if your candle burns correctly, you can probably, for every 3 or 4 candles that you burn, you can probably reuse the wax to make one new candle. And so you can see that these are pretty, they're kind of gnarly. They've got soot on them. They still have the wick. They still have the tab. And also, when I'm burning candles, if there are big chunks that are left over on the edges, I will pull those off. And so I've got a lot of chunks left. But these will all melt really well. And I'm going to show you how to filter these so that you get all of the soot and everything out of it and you get nice clean wax to go into your new candles. I also have a saucer here that has some wax on it, and I actually don't burn my beeswax candles in regular candle holders. I prefer to put them on a saucer and burn them. The reason why is that unlike soy or paraffin, where it just seems like a lot of the wax gets used up, it burns off, it evaporates, whatever, and there's not a whole lot left. Beeswax will generally have a lot of wax left over, and so I find that it's better just to burn it and then let the excess kind of run off onto the saucer, and then I can take that and remelt that. So this is stuck to the saucer right now. Oh no, part of it just came off. Beeswax I found is better than soy or paraffin in my opinion for being able to come out of candle holders or being able to come off of saucers pretty easily. The best way to do that is to put it in the freezer. The freezer really causes the wax to shrink and pull away from the sides of whatever container it's on, and so if you just put something in the freezer for a couple of hours, the wax will pull right off. So I'm going to put this in the freezer to get this last little remaining bit off that didn't want to come off. The other thing to consider when you're making beeswax candles is your wick. Now, this is probably the most important point. So if you have made soy or paraffin candles before, I just want to let you know, if you have some wicks sitting around, it's not really going to work well for your beeswax candles. That's because beeswax melts at about 30 degrees higher, 30 degrees Fahrenheit higher than soy or paraffin wax. So in my experience, when I have used wicks that have been made for soy or paraffin candles on a beeswax candle, what happened is the candle just kind of burned a little bit. It just kind of like melted a little wax in the middle of the candle, and then the flame just kind of went out because there was no place for the wax to go. So you really need a wick that will allow the flame to burn hot enough to melt enough of the wax to be successful. The interesting thing about candle making is that it's really a lot of trial and error. You have to get the size of the candle right relative to the wick, and you've got to get the material of the wick right, because if your candle doesn't burn hot enough, it's going to do exactly what I said. It's just going to burn a little of the wax, and it's not going to do much. If your candle is burning too hot, then it's just going to have a ginormous flame on it, and it's going to just burn through the wick and the wax really, really fast. And what you're looking for is a candle that will have a smaller flame. So instead of a flame like that's this high, which is way too big, you want a flame that's maybe this high. And for a little votive candle, you probably are looking for something that you can get 8 or 10 hours of burn time out of. So I actually searched on the internet, and I found I was just looking for like what are good wicks for beeswax, and this is what I found. So this is a spool of hemp wick, and I believe that this wick is already waxed. So right, you can see it sticking up really straight. The best wicks for beeswax are hemp or linen or cotton, so basically plant fibers. That's what you really want. That's what's going to make it hot enough to actually burn really well. And I didn't really look and see if I could get it in pre-cut lengths. I just got this. Getting a spool is very cost effective, and since I make very small candles, this is going to last me a very long time. The other thing you need, of course, are the little tabs that hold the wick up, and I just got a whole box of these pretty cheaply. So basically, between the two of these, I'm set up to make 1 million candles. The next thing I want to talk about are the actual tools that I use to make the candles. So right here I have this little pot, which if you patronize coffee shops, you know is a little pot for steaming milk on an espresso machine. And I use this as my double boiler for melting my wax. Now, if you purchase double boilers online that are specifically made for candle making, you'll see that usually they're about this tall. They're quite big, and those are for folks who are making big pillar candles, or who are making tapers, or who are just making large batches of candles all at once. For my needs, I'm only ever going to be making 2 or 3 candles at once. I don't burn through that many candles. They're just for my private use. So all I need is this little guy right here. I would say anything that is made of metal. I have seen people use tempered glass, like like Pyrex and things like that. I don't know how that would work. It seems a little less safe to me. But if you have, especially if you have an old Pyrex, because the new ones actually aren't tempered glass, but if you have an old Pyrex, say from 20 years ago or more, that might work a little better. But again, I think metal is probably safest. So you just want to make sure it's a container that meets your size needs, it's got a handle, and it's got a pour spout. So this is where I put all of my wax to be melted. And you'll see it's kind of like rising above the lip here, and that's okay. It will start sinking as it melts. And usually you'll see with candle making, you'll see kind of the double boiler at first kind of piled really high, because even though this is all the way up to the brim now, I mean, it's probably going to be like here by the time it all melts. So you'll notice that I put my clean wax, my new wax pucks, with my dirty wax, you know, my sooty candle bits. And some people prefer to burn or to melt all of their dirty wax together in one thing, and then all of their clean wax together in another. And in which case you would need two separate double boilers, one for dirty, one for clean wax. I, on the other hand, haven't had any problems with using clean and dirty wax together. I find that it filters really well, and so I melt it all in the same container. But we do want to make sure that we are pouring clean wax into our molds. This was also a thrift store purchase, and you know, I'll show you how I filter the dirty wax from here into here, and then I use this to pour into the candles. So again, you want something with a handle. You want something with a pour spout. I think, you know, this is ceramic, this is fine. Tempered glass is fine. Metal is fine. You just want to make sure that you're differentiating your double boiler, your thing that you're melting your dirty wax in, from the thing that's ultimately going to be holding your clean wax. Okay, and then finally we have our molds. Now, like I said, I prefer to burn my beeswax candles on saucers rather than in votive candle holders. That doesn't mean I don't use votive candle holders, though. So I've gone to the thrift store, and you can find bajillions of candle holders at the thrift store, so it's worth just going and looking and seeing what you can find. And these are the ones that have ended up being my favorite. I would say these are about 1.5 inches in diameter, and I will generally make a candle that goes most of the way up to the brim. I really like these because they have a pretty flat bottom. You can see a lot of candle holders have more curved bottoms. And I found that this is the right size for my wick, so that a candle made with this as a mold is going to burn at the right temperature. The wick is going to burn at the right temperature to kind of melt the wax to where I need it to. So it's been a lot of trial and error. And if I just dig back in here for a second and I find this candle, you'll notice that this candle is bigger, right? It came from a bigger mold. And what I found was the reason why there's so much of this candle left over after the burn, say, versus this one, is it just didn't burn very well because it was too big, right? And both of these, I'm gonna say, I just got this stuff from the thrift store. I would not personally invest big bucks in this, and I would definitely, just as a side note here, I would definitely not use anything around your house for candle making that you plan to use for food later. Now, beeswax is obviously food safe. That's not the issue. The issue is that once you've melted beeswax in something, it's just kind of ruined for anything else. It's always going to have that wax on it. So if you're looking for stuff around your house that you might want to use for this, just make sure it's something that you know that you're never going to use at the dinner table again. You know, that it's something that can just be set aside and used for candle making hereafter. Okay, and my last tool, and this is kind of the secret weapon here, is is an old sweatshirt. Again, picked up from the thrift store, but if you have an old sweatshirt lying around that you don't want anymore, this is a great use for it. So this is like a kind of standard cotton sweatshirt, so it's very smooth on the outside and it's fuzzy on the inside. And I got this tip from my friends at the Meta Earth Institute in Vermont, and they got it from one of their friends, that it's actually this fuzzy side of a sweatshirt that makes the best filter for wax. And it is true. I don't know why it works, but it does. So what you're going to see me doing is taking a little square of this, putting it over the top of my clean wax pitcher. I'm going to be pouring the dirty wax into here, and it's going to be catching not only the tabs and the leftover wick, but also the soot, and what's going to come through it is very, very clean looking wax. Before we move on to actually making the candles themselves, I want to talk a little bit about safety. So, as I've said, beeswax has a higher melting point. It has a melting point of about 145 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's going to take longer to melt, but you really want to be careful when you're handling it, because say if some beeswax got in your hand or your arm, that wax holds heat for a long time, so it will burn you more than, say, soy or paraffin wax would. So you really just want to make sure that you're being safe when you're handling it, and handling it very carefully. The other thing to think about is the flash point. So fortunately, this has never happened to me, but if you heat an oil, any oil, to a certain temperature, and every oil is different, every fat is different, at some point it's just going to spontaneously combust. The internet tells me that the flash point for beeswax is about 400 degrees Fahrenheit. I have not tested that personally, and I have no plans to test that personally. But I just want to remind you that that's why you always want to make sure that you are watching your wax as you're heating it. Now, if it does catch on fire, and I'm super hoping this will not happen to anybody, if it does catch on fire, treat it like a grease fire. Do not put water on it. Put an oven mitt on. Calmly remove it from the heat and cover it with a lid. Again, don't put water on it, because that's just going to be all kinds of bad. I've got a couple of other saucers of wax that have been in the freezer for a while. You see how that just pops off really nicely in big chunks. Okay, so I'm ready to start boiling my water. Now I've just got my little saucepan here, and it's just big enough for my double boiler to sit in. And this is okay to use for food again. This is fine, because technically ideally the wax should never touch this pan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some used aluminum foil, and I'm just going to crumple up a few pieces of it. And put it in my water here as it's heating. The reason why I'm doing this is that, as you probably know, when water is boiling in a pot, bubbles arise to the surface. And if anything flat is sitting in the pot, then the bubbles are going to need to displace that thing in order to arise. So what happens then, if I just have this sitting flat right on the bottom of the pan while it's boiling, then the bubbles are going to be constantly kind of like knocking this thing back and forth. And I'm not really worried about the wax spilling out, but it is really loud and it causes a lot of spluttering. So if you have some sort of metal trivet, or just anything really that's made out of metal that you would be okay with boiling for a while, You can just put it in the bottom of it and then put this on top, as long as it's not solid, right? It's got to have some sort of holes or something in it. And you can just put this on top of it, and then the bubbles will just come up around the double boiler. I don't really have anything like that, so I just use little wads of aluminum foil, and they just do enough to kind of like tilt this on one side so that the bubbles can escape, and it's a lot less noisy. So, all right, there we go, that's good. So it's just kind of tilted on one side, and I'm just going to turn my heat on high on my stovetop, and it's going to take a while for this to melt. Okay, so I'm back. My wax is pretty much melted. I don't even think I can really see it in there. So once it hits the melting point, you kind of want to let it heat up a little more so it's of a more pourable consistency. What I'm actually going to do, though, is take this out of here for a second and just set it on my stovetop. And I'm going to take this guy, and I've turned my water way down so it's no longer boiling. And I'm just going to kind of set him in here for a second, just to kind of heat that ceramic up. I don't want to pour hot wax into something that might be a little cold. Okay, that's probably okay. And I'll just keep him by the pan. Put this back in here. Okay. So now I have to prepare my filter. So I've got a piece of this sweatshirt. I'm just gonna figure out I don't need a huge piece, and this does not have to be exact. This can be really quick and dirty. So I'm just gonna take my scissors here, which are not even cloth scissors. You can tell how quick and dirty this is. And I'm just going to cut out roughly a square or a rectangle. Well, it's still boiling a little bit. Okay. And I've got a rubber band. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my cat hair out of there. I'm going to put my cloth over this guy. And it's going to take some doing, but I'm going to take this pretty strong rubber band and I'm just going to put it right around the top. So right now it's very taut. So what I actually want to do is I just want to work it a little bit and this can take some doing, just by kind of like pulling up on my cloth a little bit at the edges, because I don't want it to be taut, because otherwise the filtering isn't going to work so well. I want it so that there's a little room for the filtered out stuff to sit as I'm pouring. So you can kind of see here. So this rubber band is very strong. It's holding it on here, but I've got this depression in here now. So I've already made up one mold here. And I actually did this last time I made candles and ended up I didn't have enough wax to be able to use this, so I just kept it for this time. I'd actually taken a little beeswax and had melted it to the bottom, so this tab and this wick are staying in place. So let me grab a tab here. Let me find the beginning of my wick. And I want like a pretty long piece of wick to work with. So something like that. And I'm just going to put it through the center hole here and then bend it over like this, just so it wants to stay in place. All right. So now, for the moment of truth, well, one of several moments of truth. And also I can have a towel here so that I can wipe off the bottom of my double boiler. Make sure it's a thick towel so you don't burn yourself. So I'm just going to put a tiny drop. All right. And just try to get this as centered as I can. That looks pretty good. And I'm just going to leave it there for a minute or two to cool down. And I might turn this double boiler back up a little bit. So I have also taken a bamboo skewer and I've just snapped it in half. And so I'm going to use this to help me keep the wick upright as I'm pouring my wax in. So you can see I've just kind of put it on top and have gently wound my wick around it. I know a lot of people use popsicle sticks for this too. That's kind of a classic at-home implement for candle making. Okay. So it doesn't need to be super tight or anything like that. I just want, basically I want the wick to stay upright and I want it to stay still. So I'm going on the assumption now that I have enough wax to, actually I probably have more wax than I will need here for these two, which is fine. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop them out of the molds and then make more candles. So we'll see. It's a really non-stress process. And I will also say that if your candle doesn't turn out the way you want it, maybe it's burning too hot, maybe it's not burning hot enough, maybe there's some air bubbles in it and it's spluttering, don't worry about it. Just remelt it and make it into another candle using what you've learned. So there's not a whole lot of pressure for these to be perfect. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is start, and again I've got my towel here, is start pouring my wax through my filter. And this is kind of a slow process because it fills it up really fast and then you gotta let it drain through. And it will get slower and slower as you go because as the wax starts to cool down, it will start to solidify and it will have a harder time getting through the filter. So what I might want to do while I'm waiting for this to pour through is just put this back in here. Just make sure it's staying warm while I'm waiting for that wax to drip through my filter. Okay. Yeah, I can really hear it starting to pour down into there now. So the more I'm pouring, you can actually see there's this ring of wax along the filter that's starting to solidify. So it's going more and more slowly as I go along. Okay, now I'm getting to the point where I look into this thing, I can start seeing the gross stuff on the bottom. All of the soot, all of the wicks, all of the tabs are starting to emerge. And at last, all of my tabs and my wicks and my gross stuff, well, they don't really want to come out. I want them to come out though. You can see they're just sitting there. I can dig those out later, that's fine. Okay, I've gotten to a point where it looks like I've got a little liquid wax left up here, but it doesn't seem like it wants to drip through. So I'm just really, really carefully going to set this to the side then. And put it on my newspaper, that's what it's for. Okay. And I'm actually, so I've got a really, really nice pot of liquid wax in here. I'm gonna sit it in I've turned the heat off on this. I'm just gonna sit this in here for a minute, not to boil it, but just to let it warm back up a little. I had a lot more wax than I thought I did. All right. So, making sure I'm avoiding my skewer in the top of my wick here, I'm just going to very carefully pour this into the mold. Okay. That's my cat complaining in the background.
Cat restrained.
So as you can see, these started changing color almost immediately. And it looks like one of my wicks is a little off center here. Nothing I can really do about that, it looks like. No, I can drag it. Okay. There we go. Alright. So beeswax is that really dark golden color when it's melted, and then it becomes this really pale yellow when it is starting to firm up, and then these are going to firm up into a nice golden color like you saw before I melted the wax. And so what I'm going to do with these is I'm just going to leave them until they return to room temperature, and then I'm going to put them in the freezer, and once they have frozen, then they will pop out of these molds very easily. Okay, so my candles have been in the freezer for 20 or 30 minutes now. So I'm just going to take my skewer out and just kind of work it a little bit. You can also just leave them in as long as you need to. Kind of get in around the edges. I can hear it. There we go. Pulls free. And then I'll just take my scissors and cut the wick down to about 1/4 of an inch length. And there we go. So I've got my 2 candles here, and the wick is a little off center in one of them, so it will burn a little irregularly, but that's okay. I got it pretty well centered in this one. And so I'm pretty happy with these, and I'm looking forward to using them for the rest of the spring. Thanks so much.